Shane, who works as a driver for FedEx, hails from a rural region in Illinois, where the residents live in peaceful settlements of a small size. Shane received worldwide attention for his unwavering commitment to his community and his father's fight against cancer, despite the fact that he worked non-stop throughout the day. Shane, who was oblivious of the fatal incident that was about to take place, approached Donald Trump, who was running for president at the time. With the reckless confidence of a young person attending an event, Shane received a warm greeting from Trump, who referred to him as a lovely person. This encounter was not a coincidence because Trump had heard Shane's narrative and was inspired by a description of his experiences. Hence, this meeting was planned. The fact that Trump felt such a strong emotional connection to Shane's story of perseverance, altruism, and adversity led him to make the decision to give Shane a thoughtful present that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. During the course of their conversation, Trump not only signed Shane's autograph, but he also reached out to Shane's father, who shared the same name as Trump, in order to offer advice and words of encouragement, as a result of the extreme emotional agony that Shane was going through. He burst into tears when Trump presented him with a check for $10,000 to help alleviate the financial burden of his father's medical expenses. It wasn't until Shane was leaving the tent where this great conversation had taken place that he became aware of the significance of the moment. Shane attributed everything to Donald Trump, describing him as the most sincere, modest, and nice person he had ever encountered in his life. His explanation was that he had met him. Which was the reason for all of this? After watching the first story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Now, let's watch another similar story. At the Clover Cafe, a waitress approaches a table where a black girl had unintentionally spilled chocolate milk and asks them to leave. They're about to leave when a bunch of motorcyclists show up and do something out of the ordinary. Elizabeth, a mid-30-years-old white mother, is having brunch at the cafe with her adoptive black daughter, Zoe. One of their favorite places, the Clover Cafe, with its cozy atmosphere, is where they've spent many joyful weekend afternoons. But on this bright day, their encounter takes an unexpected turn. The bell over the door jingles quietly as they walk in. As Elizabeth looks around the room, she sees that their preferred place by the window is taken. They both look forward to their supper as she leads Zoe to the unoccupied table in the center. 6-year-old Zoe is a vivacious youngster with curly hair and bright eyes. She glances about joyfully and her laughter reverberates throughout the cafe, evoking the innocence of youth. Sarah, their substitute waitress, enters the room wearing an artificial smile. "What can I get you today?" Sarah asks, her voice not quite as warm as one would anticipate from such a greeting. Ignoring the slight, Elizabeth orders a milkshake, a turkey sandwich, and cornflakes for herself. She also gets Zoe an additional cup of chocolate milk. As they wait for their lunch, Zoe talks animatedly about her instructors and classmates, her tales full of the carefree delight of youth. Elizabeth is happy to see Zoe contentedly eating her cornflakes as their food comes, but Zoe spills her chocolate milk all over the table and into the floor when she reaches for her banana by accident. Elizabeth moves fast to wipe up the mess. Grabbing napkins, she attempts to shrug it off, telling herself that it's an innocent mistake that anyone could make. But Sarah, who had been watching the incident develop, has a different perspective. She lost it as the waitress came rushing over and yelled, "What a disaster!" She shot a glare at Zoe, demanding that she rein in her child. With a flush of shame running down her cheeks, Elizabeth glanced up in shock. This is a respectable establishment. The waitress snarled under her teeth, her frown casting a shadow across the room. "I apologize, I was careless. I'll make sure it's cleaned up," Elizabeth added, attempting to defuse the mood. However, Sarah would have none of it. "This cannot be addressed at this time," she reprimanded Zoe, telling her to go. Zoe looked up at her mom with tears in her eyes, her expression a mix of confusion and pain. Witnessing her daughter in pain devastated Elizabeth. "If we haven't eaten all of our food, how can we possibly leave?" "Excuse me, I will tidy it up. We can leave when she finishes her meal. Please, let us not be a nuisance," Elizabeth begged, with an unwavering expression. Sarah crossed her arms. "You paid attention, leave now," she said with conviction. Sarah snatched Zoe's arm and yanked her from her seat before Elizabeth could defend herself further. "You're out," Sarah proclaimed as she shoved the confused girl toward the exit. "Mommy." Tears were falling from Zoe's eyes as she let out a cries. With a broken heart, Elizabeth turned to Zoe. The reason they were ejected out wasn't because of the spilled chocolate milk. She understood that. The server's contempt was palpable the moment they stepped foot in the establishment. Such abuse had happened to them before. It was noticeable how people looked at them differently ever since Elizabeth adopted Zoe. Once word got out that Zoe was her daughter, people's attitudes would shift. Some would even go so far as to doubt Zoe's authenticity as their daughter or ask intrusive inquiries about her origins. Elizabeth and her husband had to adopt since they were unable to conceive. Despite Elizabeth's lifelong desire to become a mother, Zoe, a lively and loving little girl who had been in foster care since infancy, came into her life because she had a strong need to give a loving home to a kid who needed one. With the arrival of Zoe, who was just 3 years old, Elizabeth's life was filled with enormous joy and love. Every child deserved love and security, and Elizabeth was resolved to provide it to Zoe no matter what. It was love at first sight, and she knew they were destined to be together the second they laid eyes on each other. Elizabeth felt a delight she had never experienced before as a result of Zoe's contagious laughter and limitless vitality. Her spouse was likewise captivated by Zoe's genuine character. Elizabeth remained resolute during the lengthy and difficult adoption procedure. Her unwavering determination was propelled by her love for Zoe as she patiently endured the paperwork, home visits, and numerous interviews. The day Zoe moved in with Elizabeth and her husband was a day of sheer joy for everyone involved. In their honor, they hosted a modest welcome home celebration with just immediate relatives and friends in attendance. The three of them became fast friends, sharing joy and solace in one another's presence. From reading bedtime stories to morning cuddles, Elizabeth treasured every moment she spent with Zoe. The little things, like Zoe's incessant curiosity and the sound of her giggles resonating throughout the house, were loved by her. As a result, Zoe felt the unconditional love of a mother for the very first time and loved Elizabeth with all her being. For the rest of her life, "Elizabeth will love and protect Zoe," she said. Elizabeth was brought back to reality by Zoe's scream. With a firm grip on Zoe's hand, she rose to her feet. "I implore you not to touch my child. It was an accident. She didn't mean to make a mess," Elizabeth said, trying to protect her daughter while yet feeling helpless. Sitting in horrified silence, the other diners did not offer any assistance or condolences. Their forks hung in midair. A mixture of humiliation and wrath made Elizabeth's cheeks flush. While huddling close to Zoe, she whispered encouraging words into her ear. "My sweet Zoe, please don't weep. The woman had no intention of causing you harm. Instead, how about we grab some ice cream? Once that is done, I may make you whatever meal you choose. How about that?" Asking Zoe a soft question, Elizabeth did her best to reassure her of her love and desire. Zoe gave a nod, and Elizabeth grasped her hand when they moved in the direction of the door. Elizabeth was eager to keep Zoe safe even though she felt unwelcome and degraded, but Zoe would only be more upset if she confronted that awful waitress. Zoe was outside when the chilly morning air bit her cheeks and her eyes filled with unseen tears. Elizabeth gave her daughter a strong embrace. Feeling the severity of the world pressing down on her, the sound of motorcycle engines erupted when they were about to exit the cafe. Opposite the cafe, a convoy of motorcyclists wearing leather jackets and helmets drew up. Known for their rugged exterior, they belonged to the local biker gang. Jack, a burly man who led them, saw that Elizabeth and Zoe were upset when they were outside. Zoe was still crying from the earlier incident inside, and Elizabeth was giving her comfort. Out of nowhere, Jack's son, one of the younger men, pointed to them and exclaimed, "That's the woman and her child." The motorcycle club, called the Iron Brotherhood, was known for its strong sense of justice and close-knit community. Many had retired, having come through their own challenges and now relishing their golden years. They saw the value of speaking up for people who were unable to defend themselves all the time. Jack's kid informed them of what he had seen in the cafe that afternoon following their customary bike through town while taking in the beautiful weather and wide roads. Jack took off his helmet to show a gentle face with a gray beard. He walked over to Elizabeth and Zoe, looking really worried. "Hey, is everything all right?" Elizabeth appreciated the stranger's care even though she was still irritated. Her voice quivered with emotion when she described the circumstances. Jack listened intently, scowling when he learned about the waitress's actions. It seems that his son had not overstated. Jack experienced a wave of rage and a strong desire to set things right. He turned to face his fellow riders and gave a firm nod. "We have to take this seriously," he remarked. "We must demonstrate to the waitress that this conduct will not be accepted. Accompany me." Jack entered the cafe with Elizabeth by his side, his resolve firm but first reluctant. Elizabeth and Zoe had no option but to follow the gang of motorcycles into the cafe as they marched toward them, the bikers following closely behind. Heads turned in astonishment among the patrons inside, their commanding presence guaranteeing they would be recognized. When Sarah saw them, her face went white. They were all tattooed, muscular, and intimidating looking. Jack strode over to her with composure and authority. He stated impartially, "We've heard there was an issue with some customers, a problem." Sarah spoke up as well, not knowing these motorcyclists' identities but thinking they were friends Elizabeth had brought to confront her. "No, this is not a problem," she answered with haste. "Are you telling me a lie? Are you aware of who I am?" Jack's voice was unwavering. Stunned, Sarah looked at Elizabeth and Zoe, not knowing quite how to respond. "They, created a mess. I requested that they depart," she clarified, sounding defensive. Jack's gaze grew strained. Her drink was overturned by a toddler. "It makes no sense to expel them. Discrimination is not tolerated here," he declared resolutely. The other motorcyclists applied pressure with their nods of agreement. A noise from behind the cafe roused the manager, who came out of his office. As he glanced between Sarah and Jack, he exclaimed, "What's happening here?" His voice lowered when he noticed Jack. "Good day, boss. Who or what is responsible for this delight?" "Your boy was here to pick up the ledgers," Jack continued, highlighting the harsh treatment that Zoe and Elizabeth had endured. The fact that the cafe belonged to the biker's commander, Jack, was unknown to Sarah and Elizabeth. Jack related the story, explaining how Sarah had thrown them out of the house because Zoe had spilled her chocolate milk. After hearing about what happened at the cafe and feeling sorry for Elizabeth, Jack's kid rushed back to see his dad and the motorcyclists, upset about Sarah's rough treatment of the child. Jack and the bikers didn't waste any time getting up and racing to the cafe, where they met up with Zoe and Elizabeth moments before they stepped out. As the manager recognized the gravity of the situation, he looked over at Sarah. "This cannot be tolerated," he told her with conviction that she couldn't treat their consumers like this. Zoe intervened just when Sarah was about to run away, muttering an apology. "Where do you think you're going?" Then Zoe made a demand. "Please express your apologies to the small child on my behalf. She was unable to complete her meal since you ruined her day." Sarah apologized as she looked over at Zoe and Elizabeth. "I deeply regret the events that transpired. Whatever it is, I'm utterly bewildered." She begged for forgiveness. Although Elizabeth graciously accepted the apologies, Zoe remained too wounded to even look Sarah in the face. "I apologize for that. Rest assured, that won't happen again. Take a seat, and feel free to order whatever you like." The manager generously volunteered to cover it. Elizabeth looked across at Zoe, who was no longer sobbing. Zoe declined her request to continue dining at that establishment when she was requested by her. Her emotions were still raw from the earlier altercation. Elizabeth turned to Jack and the other motorcyclists and thanked them. She expressed her gratitude for the thoughtful offer, but said, "My daughter and I would prefer to go somewhere else." Recognizing the difficulty of returning and acting as if nothing had transpired, the motorcyclists nodded sympathetically. Unexpectedly, when Zoe and Elizabeth made their way to the door, the motorcyclists offered to take them to another restaurant, one of Jack's, a few blocks away, where they could relax. Meals will be provided at no cost to them, they were told. Astonishment washed across Elizabeth when she realized the extent of the kindness shown to them. Tears started to fill up in her eyes. She took their offer as she looked at the strangers who had defended them and were prepared to make up for the subpar treatment they had received. The bikers were thrilled that their unannounced presence had made things feel more fair and friendly. However, they were in for another surprise. They offered to take the mother and daughter for a ride on one of the motorcycles, which was ideal for Zoe and her mother because it had a shiny sidecar. With friendly and mischievous eyes, the bikers persisted, and Jack comforted the mother that they would ride carefully to avoid frightening or endangering Zoe. As Zoe got into the sidecar and her mother settled down next to her, her expression brightened. The motorcyclists' motors roared, producing a comforting, low sound. When they started their voyage, their leather coats shone in the midday light, forming a protective circle around the sidecar, all around them. The city sprang to life as people paused, gawked, and gave them enthusiastic applause. Zoe was protected and felt like a queen. She grinned and waved to the interested bystanders as her eyes grew big with wonder. Elizabeth felt a mixture of relief and delight when the breeze played with her curls and she held her daughter close. Upon reaching the restaurant, the bikers skillfully parked their bikes and assisted Elizabeth and Zoe from the sidecar. Zoe's eyes glistened with joy as she embraced each biker, forgetting her earlier melancholy. Elizabeth expressed her sincere gratitude to them. The motorcyclist simply grinned, happy to have helped a mother and her daughter transform a traumatic day into a wonderful memory. Before Zoe entered the restaurant, one of the bikers who had waited behind to buy her a doll gave it to her. Elizabeth's heart filled with thankfulness as her eyes shone brightly the entire way to the dining establishment. Looking at her daughter, she realized that these unanticipated protectors had turned this moment of grief into a moment of unity. Elizabeth thanked the motorcyclists when their lunch was done, and she and Zoe departed the cafe. They would always have that day's memory with them. Before returning home, Zoe recommended visiting the park. Elizabeth gripped Zoe's hand closely when they strolled because she wanted to make sure Zoe knew the importance of being kind and speaking out against injustice. She started out by outlining the significance of their interaction because she wanted Zoe to be ready for the possibility that she will run into similar situations in the future. Elizabeth whispered, "You know, Zoe, what happened today was wrong. It is never acceptable for someone to treat someone poorly due to their skin tone or for any other reason. However, we also discovered something significant." With curious expression on her face, Zoe raised her big eyes to gaze at her mother. "What did we learn, Mommy?" Elizabeth softly squeezed Zoe's hand and said, "We learned that there are good people in the world who will stand up for what's right, even when it's not easy." Gazing at the toy that the motorcyclists had brought for her, Zoe gave a thoughtful nod. "Mom, I want to be just like them. I also wish to assist others." Elizabeth grinned broadly, pride filling her heart. "You will, my love, I'm sure of it. You already have a heart of gold." Elizabeth and Zoe cooked Zoe's favorite dinner together back at home, in sharp contrast to the frigid welcome they had received earlier. The warmth of their house surrounded them. Zoe told her husband all about what happened at the cafe when he came home. Elizabeth was able to soothe his wrath. As they reflected on the day, they remembered the motorcyclist's generosity and the value of doing the right thing. Elizabeth kissed Zoe goodnight when she read her favorite bedtime story. Afterward, Elizabeth stood by the window and thought about what had happened that day. They would inevitably meet more obstacles like the one they encountered in the cafe, but she was confident that they could conquer all obstacles as a unit if they were brave and loved one another. Word of the motorcyclists' involvement quickly traveled around the community the following morning. The story of two complete strangers who stood up against prejudice touched many. An article highlighting the significance of communal cohesion and goodwill was also included in the local newspaper. Many of Elizabeth's friends and neighbors reached out to her via phone or text to offer their encouragement and praise. Evidently, the incident had ignited a community-wide dialogue around tolerance and mutual support. When considering the waitress's actions toward the young black girl, it is critical to remember that no form of racial discrimination or abuse is ever appropriate. The server ought to have been more courteous and respectful to the girl than any other customer. She could have made her feel welcome and appreciated by engaging with her positively rather than ignoring or rejecting her. Promoting equality and fairness in all interactions is essential, as is creating an inclusive space where everyone feels valued and respected. After watching the stories above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed our video, please like, subscribe, and share our channel. That's all about today's stories. See you next time.